Hi, I'm Van and welcome to Overland Lab. I've had quite a few people ask me about the suspension that I'm running on the 2011 F-150 adventure truck, and I decided that in order to address the suspension, I'm going to do a three-part series of videos. The first one, the one you're watching now, is going to basically be a planning video where I talk about some of the considerations that I had in putting an aftermarket suspension on the truck. The second part is going to address specific front suspension components and functionality, and then the third part is going to address rear suspension components and kind of functionality. This is by no means meant to be a comprehensive video on all aftermarket suspensions for any truck. Specifically, this is going to be a video about the 09 through 14 F-150 and in the specific role of a multi-purpose adventure truck. Your considerations may be wildly different. The 09 through 14 F-150 is a very versatile vehicle. It can be set up for simply looking aggressive, kind of that aggressive off-road look that a lot of guys like. They can be set up to be a heavy-duty off-roader. They can be set up for a pre-runner role. But specifically, I wanted to set it up as kind of a jack-of-all-trades adventure truck, like I've talked about many other times on the channel. So in that specific role, there are specific considerations that need to be made. The first and foremost is going to be weight considerations. One mistake I think a lot of people make, and that I am guilty of too, is wanting to do a suspension on a truck first, because it's a drastic change, it improves the aesthetics of the truck, it really looks cool, and it is one of the more important changes that you can make to a truck. The problem is specifically in an adventure truck role, you're running a lot of gear, and so it's a lot better to actually get at least your major components out of the way first. So if you're running, heavy bumpers, stuff like that, get those installed first, and then you buy the kind of suspension that'll help you carry that weight. So for me, I knew up front I wasn't going to be running a heavy bull bar, and I wasn't going to be running like a grill guard, but I was planning on running heavy-duty skid plates, especially up front. I was planning on running a winch plate and a winch, and I knew I'd be running some rocker guards of some kind up front. So in the rear, on the other hand, I knew I was going to be running a lot more gear than the stock truck was set up to run. I was running a rooftop tent, running a topper, and running a set of drawers as well as a rack. And so right there, I'm up to about 650 pounds of added weight in the rear, on top of actually recovery gear, tools, whatever sort of camping gear that I'd want to bring along. So I knew I'd be running a lot of weight. I also knew that my weight distribution was going to be not split 50-50, more like 30 up front and 70% in the back, roughly. Once you know what gear you're running, and once you have your truck kind of set to fighting weight, it's actually a good idea to take it to a scale. If you can find a 4-point scale that actually has an individual scale for each wheel, that'd be ideal, because then you can really fine-tune the weight distribution. But if you can, at the very least, take it to a scrapyard or a dump or someone that actually would have a weigh bridge, you get a pretty good idea of what sort of additional weight you've added to your truck. Because if you overestimate or underestimate, you're going to end up with buying the wrong kind of suspension for your specific application. So being able to carry the extra weight on a regular basis was something that was going to be really important for me. I also wanted to improve the performance over the factory suspension. My truck was the XLT trim level, and so the stock suspension really wasn't anything all that impressive. It was kind of saggy, especially in the rear. It's kind of soft off-road. It really isn't ideal. So really what I wanted to improve about it is I wanted to tighten up the suspension. I wanted to improve articulation, so up travel as well as down travel, particularly in the front. I wanted to gain ground clearance, so adding a little bit of lift does help clearance of everything. But I wanted to be able to do all of that, adding off-road performance while maintaining as much on-road manners as possible. As I've discussed in other videos, my truck realistically spends 95-ish% of its life on some kind of paved road or gravel road. So if I set up a truck, or I set up my truck for heavy-duty off-road use, that can make it really undrivable or even unsafe on the road. So it needs to be able to maintain its manners while still being able to go hard off-road while hauling all my gear. One of the other things that I knew going into my aftermarket suspension is I wanted to run, at least for now, a 285 70-17. I've already discussed my wheel and tire setup in another video. I'll put a link to it. But if I knew I wasn't going to be running huge tires, that helps me narrow down the kind of suspension that I want. I also knew that I wasn't going to be upgrading my gears anytime soon, so with the stock 355 gears, I really don't want to go any bigger than a 285 7017 or roughly a 33. One of the other big considerations me and anyone else looking to buy an aftermarket suspension for the truck has is price. Going into this, I knew I wanted to buy a good suspension that would be able to last in the long haul, but I also couldn't afford to buy an ultra high-end, top-of-the-line suspension. So I needed to find a good, high-value system for the truck. And I think I did manage to achieve that, as I'll discuss in parts 2 and part 3. Once you've identified the necessity and requirements that you're going to have for your aftermarket suspension for your 09 through 14 F-150, there's generally 3 kinds of lifts that you can choose from. First is a cheater lift, which usually consists of a leveling kit in the front with or without a rear lift block or rear shock. These generally allow you to clear up to a 33-inch tall tire. They generally get you 2 to 3 inches of lift, and they're really not a bad way to go. If you're looking for more aesthetics than functionality, a cheater lift's a good way to go. If you just want to put some bigger tires, make the truck look a little more aggressive, it's a good way to go. However, there's no real gain in functionality with a cheater lift. All you're really doing is adding a spacer to the top of the coilover and to the top of the leaf springs that raise the truck suspension up, but they don't actually change spring rate or gain you any performance or gain you any articulation, because everything else stays stock, which is both good and bad. It keeps the cost of doing the entire lift down, but again, there's no real improvements in functionality. The next kind of aftermarket suspension that you tend to see is a differential drop style suspension. Generally, these get you 4 to 6 inches of lift or more, depending on how extreme the kit is. So you can fit much larger tires, 35s, 37s, or even larger, depending on how hardcore the kit is, and it gains you an enormous amount of ground clearance. The downside of these kits, though, is they're generally very difficult to install because they're very invasive. It involves actually removing the front differential and lowering it a couple of inches using a series of brackets, and to maintain some of the driveline angles so nothing binds, to gain you your ground clearance. Some of these kits are bolt-on, some of them do require cutting and welding, so on a lot of these kits it's a point of no return. There's no way to return the truck to stock without some substantial welding once the kit's installed. But if you want to gain a lot of suspension lift, 4 inches or more, the differential drop is basically the way you need to go. You really cannot stress the driveline angles on an 09 through 14 F-150 with more than 3 inches of lift. At that point, you need to do a differential drop. The downside with these kits too is they're very expensive. Some of them include spacers so that you don't need to replace the front coilovers, and they include heavy-duty rear blocks so that you don't need to replace the rear springs. So now you're back to gaining a lot of lift, but also not gaining any performance. The ones that do include coilovers are generally very expensive. So for a lot of people, and for a guy like me, these are essentially cost prohibitive. If you want big lift and big tires, this is basically the way you have to go, but it's not the right suspension for me. The way I decided to go is option 3, which is essentially a replacement coilover in the front and then a replacement rear leaf spring and shock absorber in the rear. For the front, I'm going to be running a very simple replacement coilover setup. I'm not going to be running an external reservoir, primarily out of cost consideration, and I'm also not going to be running an adjustable system in the front, which also saves me some money. I am, however, running an aftermarket upper control arm. These are typically a very expensive upgrade to the 09 through 14 series of F-150s, but it's worthwhile because, first of all, the stock upper control arm is relatively weak. It's just a simple stamped upper control arm with a ball joint, whereas most aftermarket upper control arms are heavy, tubular upper control arms with a uniball joint, which is much stronger. In addition, the uniball is replaceable and repairable, so now you don't replace it when it wears out. You can maintain it and then replace the uniball when the time comes. And also it drastically improves the articulation of the front suspension. You get improved up travel as well as down travel. So while it's an investment now, it's really ideal. Also, the stock upper control arms can bind with an aftermarket suspension because they're not designed for that added suspension travel. In the rear, I'm planning on running a replacement rear spring. I was definitely stressing out the stock leaf springs on my F-150. With the topper, drawers, and rooftop tent, it was running level or even sagging a little below level. So I wanted to return it to factory rake when I'm not running at full camping weight, and I wanted it to level out once it was loaded down with gear. So in order to do that, I need to do a replacement rear leaf spring. I wanted to utilize the stock lift spacer that's back there. I didn't want to have to run bigger lift blocks. I knew I wanted to run a heavy-duty replacement shock. Again, for cost consideration, I wouldn't be running an external reservoir shock, and I would have to run longer U-bolts. So it's a relatively straightforward gear list and it's a relatively straightforward lift. Hopefully this video helped you understand some of the considerations that I had going into installing an aftermarket suspension on the 2011 F-150 adventure truck. As always, thank you for watching. Please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I look forward to bringing you parts 2 and 3 of this series. Also, check out my buddy's channel, rootsgameandtrail.com, for all of your outdoor and kind of adventure needs. And again, thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you on the next video.